That's appropriate. It's a longer intro, I see. Welcome to the Reason Roundtable, live in New York City. Yeah. That's right. This is the supplementary live podcast to our weekly Monday morning podcast that we do at Reason, the magazine Free Minds and Free Markets, which has been publishing now for longer than 3 of the 4 of us have been alive. I'll let that to your imagination of which one that might be. We started this out a while ago. We planned this a while ago. We didn't realize it was going to be such a huge day in American life, in American political life. President Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. Today announced that he is rerunning for president officially. He had a little video and everything in which he said that we have a choice in front of us where America's going to be more or less free based on that election. So that's exciting. Also today, just a few blocks south of us, began the other presidential contenders, likely presidential contenders, rape trial. That began today, Donald Trump. It's a civil rape trial. What, is it too soon? It's happened. It's not my fault. So just to get you excited about the presidential election, which more or less starts today, according to at least me, before the year 2020, the oldest ever candidates to run for president, major party nominee candidates, were 73 years old. That was Ronald Reagan in 84 and Bob Dole in 96. If we get the America that I think that we probably deserve, which is Joe Biden versus Donald Trump in 2024, it'll be an 81-year-old, a young 81, and a 78-year-old running for president. Wow. So that's exciting. That's a tease for what we're going to talk about a little bit later. But what actually people in New York seem to be talking about the most over the past, 24 hours is the red wedding that happened yesterday in the cable news when Tucker Carlson was executed or stabbed or something, and Don Lemon was thrown out of a window on the 3rd floor. And the head of NBC Universal, that was a little bit more on the down low, but he was bounced too for some kind of affair. And Nate Silver, ABC purged Nate Silver just today. We were recording yesterday, all of you who listen, which is obviously all of you here. We were recording yesterday when we got the news about Tucker Carlson. So we'll do a quick little go round table and it's been 24 plus hours since then. What Katherine Mangu-Ward. Oh, by the way, this is what they all look like in case you didn't know. This is Katherine Mangu-Ward, Peter Suderman, Nick Gillespie over there. So what have we learned? What does this tell us about media, about cable news, about conservatism, or anything else, says you now?
I feel like I really learned a lot about how exactly I should play it when I fire the 3 of you. There were lessons for me there, honestly. Y'all gonna go home on a Friday afternoon saying, see you on Monday. And you're not.
That's ice cold. Peter?
I can't tell whether this was the last episode of the season or the first, but either way, it portends that there is a complete paradigm shift coming. That the world we have been living in, the internet, social media dominated world that we have all been kind of clicking our way through since 2010 or so, that world is coming to an end, and we are about to find out what's coming next. I don't know what it is, but it will not include Tucker Carlson in prime time.
Nicholas Gillespie.
I think the big takeaway is that networks are bigger and solar systems are bigger than the stars that populate them. The big winner here is still Fox, and they got rid of Bill O'Reilly, they got rid of Megyn Kelly, they got rid of Gretchen Carlson, they got rid of Shepard Smith. None of those people have, Glenn Beck, none of those people have become bigger than they were at Fox. And that doesn't fill me with joy. It's just an observation. And I think Tucker will be fine. I hope he goes back to writing. We've talked about this. He's a great print journalist who did great reporting back in the day. I suspect he won't.
He's also an underrated Central Park fisherman, for those of you who have seen that video. It's pretty tremendous to look at. One thing that I think has gotten lost in all the kind of clucking about the Fox Dominion lawsuit, or at least the making fun of it on CNN and MSNBC is to the degree to which this stuff, including Don Lemon getting fired yesterday at CNN, has illustrated how much those other networks have become more like Fox over the years. Don Lemon, there's a piece, and forgive me for recommending Ben Dreyfuss anything, but Ben Dreyfuss had a pretty good Substack. He's probably, hi Ben. In which he pointed out that the underlying interview that Don Lemon was doing with Vivek Ramaswamy was horrible. And that's actually kind of par for the course, and this has helped trigger the firing of him. Par for the course in cable news. It's become less about like trying to figure stuff out and more about fan service for people's politics, including, channel your fake outrage at people if they cross some kind of line. And I think that fan service aspect, all the networks do it, and they're going to continue to do it.
Can I put a word in for Don Lemon?
Yes,
Don
please.
Lemon gave me what is still, I consider, the high point of my career. He actually asked me to debate Patrick Kennedy about legalizing weed on CNN, and I grew up in an Irish Catholic household, the 1% that hate the Kennedy clan and the Kennedy compounds and all of that. And I kicked Patrick Kennedy's ass because he's an idiot. He's a regression below the mean, stupid grandson theory cubed. So I thank Don Lemon for that. I only wish that my parents had been here to witness it.
I do think we should not underestimate Ramaswamy's role in the purges here, because he was also scheduled to appear on Tucker Carlson on Monday.
Oh, that's right.
So he's like the Arya Stark of pundits.
I hate to say this, but we're doing a Reason live stream with him on Thursday. So Zach
I said what I said.
and we got
Problem
our hands,
solved.
Yeah, everything's falling into place.
Rule of three, etc. All right, quick show by applause. How many of you live in or adjacent to New York City? Pretty good. Also mean it. How many of you enjoy legal marijuana? Okay. And how many of you are stoned right now?
There it is.
Sarah, you got to represent, man. What are we even doing here? Okay, so it seems that there's been all this zigzagging kind of policy and discussion in New York City in particular, having to do with what pleasurables one can and cannot put into one's body. There's been a couple of great headlines. Wall Street Journal last month, I think, says this smells like a declining city. New York Post was talking about New Yorkers have become zombies because of weed. Liz Wolfe, who may or may not be in this room, but she'll probably be there a little bit later, wrote about this as well. But there's also like genuine, legitimate concern among people. Every bodega has become a vape store for some reason over the last couple of years, even though vapes, I think, are technically still illegal. It's very confusing. 14-year-olds can get gummies of anything, anywhere, and can't tell you why I know that, but they really can get that stuff anywhere.
They're bouncing here and there and everywhere. Gummy bears.
More of that, please. And then just over the weekend, Kathy Hochul, who somehow is the governor of the state, suggested that maybe she's sort of laying the groundwork for banning all tobacco, because that really works great in New York. So a lot of booze, but a lot of confusion about this. My question to you, Katherine Mangu-Ward, as the editrix of Reason, is this the future that libertarians wanted? Is this what we wanted to legalize stuff, and now it's this big mess?
It is the future we wanted. I will say, like, if we have to choose teams between Team Cigarette and Team Weed, I am actually Team Cigarette. I just think nicotine is a hell of a drug. It's delightful. But I find the sort of overwrought reaction, even among those of us who are friendly to legalization, to like the whiff of cannabis on the breeze, to be both predictable and also kind of disappointing. There's an easy solution to this, and Jacob Sullum has been writing about it for years, which is it's kind of illegal to just make a nice place indoors to smoke your weed right now. And we could just legalize that, right? Like Colorado has done it. There's one place in West Hollywood that's done it. And if you could just consume your substances in, I don't know, maybe like a venue that serves them. And then you could also like see a show and maybe have some fries or something. Whatever substances you prefer, that would solve the problem. And I think like the sort of forgetfulness of what New York used to smell like, which was just tobacco smoke all the time. All the time.
Good days.
And, you know, we're going to get used to this, too.
And cat urine.
Yeah.
That's a constant. That's always.
Nick, you were born here, I think. You live here.
Yep.
You were raised in some place close by. What
Matt,
is it?
It's called New Jersey.
Yeah,
and it's
just
the
don't say it. I don't
greatest
recognize it.
state in the country. It's the opposite of what states are, what Kennedys are to Irish Catholics or something like that. Somehow.
What is it with New York and Prohibition? Our great colleagues Meredith and Austin Bragg have a great movie out called Pinball. I recommend everyone go look at it. It's awesome. Because pinball machines were outlawed in New York until 1976, which is absolutely insane. It's true. Gotta go see the movie. What is it about New York and Prohibition?
It's, Prohibition in New York during liquor prohibition was one of the places where it wasn't enforced very much.
That's true.
Because Fiorello LaGuardia, the guy who actually instituted the pinball ban, was like, we're not going to do that. But what I find most interesting about the weed story is New York was the first state to actually legalize smoking in public, which Colorado didn't do, et cetera. That's one of the reasons why there's so much lighting up all over the place. But the most interesting thing is the legalization happened in 2021. There are something like in New York City, there are 1,400, according to the New York Post, 1,400 illegal or gray market cannabis stores around the city. There are only something like 7 or 8 that are actually licensed and operating because the city and the state are so slow and so bad about actually licensing and putting stuff into place. What I find most interesting about this is that people have said, screw it, we're just going to start selling it. And the police have given up. I mean, they don't ticket people for this, which is a win, and that's actually how drug legalization is going to happen. It is going to be forced on politicians and on localities and jurisdictions by people simply using drugs. And I think that's a win, and it's very New York, by the way.
Peter, is there something structural to the way these laws are designed that make them work so bad? What's your feeling?
Well, part of the problem with the way that New York has legalized weed is that it was designed in part to do the legalization, but in some sense the legalization was secondary, because what the legislature and Governor Cuomo wanted to do most of all was to raise tax revenue. And they were like, this arresting people, we've done that for a while, we're sort of over it. What we would really like to do is make money for the state. And so the taxes on New York weed to do it legally are just incredibly high, to the point where it's going to drive people into the black market. It's going to drive sales into the black market. And so it is a kind of quasi-legalization that is shooting itself in the foot, if not cutting its own, slitting its own throat. Yeah, right? That worked?
No.
Right, like at the same time, because it's saying, it's legal, except we're going to make it really, really expensive. And other states, even blue states, have learned this lesson and have actually reduced their tax rates because they realized that their legalization scheme came with such high taxes that it was not really producing a real legal market. And it's not as if that the legislature wasn't warned. There is a great impact assessment from 2018.
Peter is actually bringing out
Sudermaning
an
so
impact
hard
assessment.
right now.
Wow.
To a comedy
the
club.
governor's office was like, hey, the rest of the government, look at this, see what would happen. And they had the Office of Cannabis Management. And you can still find this today. It is still posted on the website. And what it says in this very, very, very long and very boring report is the higher the tax rate imposed, the higher the legal market price will be. In turn, a higher legal market price will have a greater price effect, which will result in users less likely to more likely to exit the unregulated market. Basically, if you tax it too much, you're going to create a black market. And so they were like, we're going to tax it too much.
Which was the point of every Cheech and Chong sketch in 1975.
Not since Lenny Bruce has there reading a phone book has there been such an excitement in the New York Comedy Club. Here, but Katherine, all you dang libertarians, you just laugh at people, mock Thomas Chatterton Williams for being upset at marijuana smoke in the streets of New York City, do you feel like you might be alienating people who have legitimate grievances about the sense of increased disorder in big cities and places like New York? Don't you interrupt me. I saw you making the interrupting sign with your face. Which is to say, I mean, New York, the suburbs of New York flipped Congress to Republicans in part because of people were kind of fed up with the way that New York felt. Will legalization get kind of thrown in with some of these other types of policing issues or criminal justice issues and be discredited as part of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a danger. If you do legalization or privatization badly, then sometimes it backfires. And I do think that there is, it's also convenient, right? Like, we have been through some stuff in the last few years, and there are many, many, many possible explanations for why New York feels a little these days out on the streets. And, people are like, well, what could we target? What could we talk about? What could we kind of fixate on? And then they breathe in, but not like enough. And they're like, oh my God, it's the weed. And, without opening up a whole nother can of worms, I think this is also what we're seeing with some of the panic over social media and teenagers. Like, there's a few obvious changes that people can see and feel day to day. And then there's a bigger, broader, more confusing cultural thing that's going on that is at least largely, I think, a legacy of COVID shutdowns. We can't undo that, but we could undo marijuana legalization. Maybe. I don't know. Nick might be right that this is not undoable at this point.
One of the things we interviewed Bill Bratton, the former police commissioner of New York, both under Giuliani and then under Bill de Blasio. He is still saying it's the worst thing ever to let marijuana be legal. And you see, because people are still making deals in the streets. And it's like, come on.
Think it through. You were almost there. You were so close.
Yeah, to paraphrase Joe Biden, come on, man. It's like, if you actually made legal marketplaces open where people would go into stores to buy weed at a good price that's not overtaxed, suddenly, you don't see a lot of people selling beer on street corners.
I think
if only.
You can fix this pretty easily, but policy really matters, and the policy is not good right now.
There are real parallels to alcohol prohibition here, because about a year ago I went back and I read a bunch of historical papers on the causes of prohibition and sort of looking at sort of research, often even in some cases even sort of academic papers from before prohibition, and trying to sort of talk about like what people felt like at the time, right? That's what I was looking at, and it was just amazing to see how before prohibition, sort of normal, like what we would think of as suburban middle class types, just thought that alcohol was this absolute demon that was ruining the streets. And that was a big part of the push for prohibition, was the idea that pubs and that bars, that places where people would gather to drink were just dens of iniquity, and then they would spill out onto the streets and make those streets feel unsafe, feel unclean, and feel messy.
Say her name, Peter. It's Carrie Nation. You got to call her out.
And then they went through prohibition, and they were like, that was actually a lot worse. And so I just want to say that, like, even if you don't like the smell of weed, a world in which you can smell weed on the streets of New York or the streets of D.C. is a better world. It is I think of Robert Duvall in Apocalypse Now, right? It's like, I love the smell of weed in the morning. It smells like victory. And it does. It actually smells like victory.
Deep cut, when Reason TV was first starting under the tutelage of Nick Gillespie back in 2007, Nick, I want to say?
Late 2007, yeah.
We had the Drew Carey Project. He did the first 10 or so videos. I think that might have been the first one. He walked into a medical marijuana facility in California. California was a trailblazer on that, and he did the "I love the smell of freedom" shtick, and it worked.
It smells like freedom. Yeah,
exactly.
Just as he was being named the host of The Price Is Right, and then he was like, timing.
All right, we're going to shift gears, as mentioned at the top. Basically, presidential season is with us. Reason, over the years, has been happily on the outside of most politics and most presidential politics in particular. I remember under Nick's editorship in 2004, we had John Kerry and What was the other guy? George W. Bush. And like the good news is that one of these guys is going to lose. In 2020, we had dueling the case against Biden and the case against Trump. There wasn't any cases for anyone, to be clear. So we're going to do a little round of this now of talking about why other people, because I think Joe Biden's been with us for a while. Donald Trump's been with us for a while. We kind of know the contours of the elephant. But thank you. You understand. But we got some new people who want to be president too. So we're going to go down the list. We're all going to take different people and talk about why this person too would be a terrible president. Peter Suderman is from Florida. Peter, why don't you start with Ron DeSantis?
Okay, so the biggest strike against Ron DeSantis is that he lives in Florida on purpose. I'm from Florida. I can't imagine why anyone would want to stay there, much less govern the state. No, look, he's a tapioca-fingered Yale grad who is like posing as a man of the people. He has turned Florida into the absolute epicenter of the right's dumbest culture wars. He is a book banner, a free speech hater. He's gone to war with Disney because Disney's staffers were mad about a dumb law that he passed. And the whole thing, there are a bunch of threads to this, including the fact that he really loves the idea of using state power against private organizations that are engaged in political expression. But the big thing is that Ron DeSantis hates free speech, and he loves to go after people for expression. And this has been his big his big crusade is other people are saying stuff, and that makes conservatives feel uncomfortable. Well, we're not going to let that happen. That's a bad tendency in a politician, and it's especially a bad tendency in somebody who wants to lead one of the two major political parties and be president of the United States.
I don't know, man, but he fights. He fights. Why don't you like fighting, Peter Suderman?
And he's not going to let the lack of a spoon get in the way of him and some pudding. I mean, that guy, you can only imagine Putin is shaking in his boots.
Yeah. All right, we're going to, because Katherine is a lady, we're going to give her Nikki Haley. Why would she be that terrible president?
Thank you, Matt. You know I love it when you give me the ladies. Okay, so Nikki Haley, here's the thing about her. She's a hawk. She's like an everything hawk. Right? She's a China hawk. She's a Russia hawk. She's a border hawk. You can find things in her history that she might be a budget hawk, but I think here's the thing. Almost every Republican who's like semi-recently come of presidential age, they were around at this moment. And if you had to give it a name, you might call it the libertarian moment. Matt.
Too soon.
You might call it that. The Tea Party moment, whatever you want to call it. There was this like hot second when we were like, did we win? You know? And so like, if you read...
Turns out not.
If you read, like, Eric Boehm has written about this in the pages of Reason. If you read Ron DeSantis' first book, it kind of sounds okay-ish on that stuff. We don't know what she's going to do. I will give... by the way, I looked up what a lady hawk is called because I thought it might be something cool, and it's a hen.
Really?
Yeah.
That's very disappointing.
Really disappointing. There's a really interesting... thing, but we won't get into it. Okay, but what I do want to say is, unlike DeSantis, unlike Trump, Nikki Haley does seem to kind of hate the culture war a little bit. She's probably still going to do it, and it's still going to suck. But she is on the record saying some like Mitch Daniels-y things about how maybe there's other stuff going on and we shouldn't just do culture war all the time. And yes, I did just shoehorn Mitch Daniels into this conversation.
Let it go.
About...
He said no,
Thank
Katherine.
you. I just think he'd be a good president.
Didn't she give the nice speech the one time with the Confederate deal?
Yeah, she gave a couple nice speeches a couple times, but she's gonna do all the wars.
All right, Nick, you're going to talk about someone who hasn't declared, but God, he wants to be president. He's been wanting to be president since he was posing for really good pictures with old what's-her-face, Gavin Newsom, governor of California. He's making tours.
The beauty shots on the kind of polar bear skin rug with Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Yeah.
Back in the day. Well,
Can't
the good
unsee
news about Gavin Newsom is he looks exactly like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. And, you know, it's been a while since we've had a president with movie star good looks, I think. But Newsom, you know, all you need to know about Newsom is he's taken California, where I've lived at times, Matt is from. You know, California has every advantage going for it, and he managed for the first time in recorded history to drive people out of California. People, you know, it actually lost population and a congressional seat under him. But the real things about him is he represents the worst kind of elites. You know, the laws are for the little people. We saw this during COVID when he went to the French Laundry, the famous restaurant, and ate indoors while not allowing other people to do that. He sent his kids to private school while not allowing public schools in California to convene classes on a regular basis. And when he was governor, or rather mayor of San Francisco, he was bordering always on going full Pol Pot, where he had announced, among other things, that you couldn't have donuts at staff meetings anymore. Bagels needed to be cut in half or in quarters so that to encourage people or to minimize overeating. And then he declared at some point that median grass strips that homeless people could farm there. So it was like, you know, he was a couple of weeks away from declaring, you know, people with eyeglasses having presumed bourgeois tendencies and should be put out into concentration camps. Gavin Newsom would be a status quo politician, and he's about half the age of Trump or Biden, so he would be around forever. And he is absolutely the worst kind of retread of a great society idea of that you can just milk the economy like a cow. It will never die. It will never reduce its milk. He would be a disaster. And I think he's very likely, if not to get the nomination, to be really far into the mix either this time or next time.
That is not how cows work. You call yourself a New Jerseyan.
I worked at the LA Times editorial board in 2006 and 2007, and we'd get like glad-handing politicians come through, and you'd have little interactions with them. Joe Biden came in, had a big plan of partitioning Iraq. That was real great. And Gavin Newsom was the mayor of San Francisco, and he came in, and he was really good looking, and he had command, and he was jocular and stuff, and he broke out this plan, and he had charts and world weariness and lessons learned about turnkey, full service solutions that are going to do this and that. And the long and the short of it was, he had finally discovered, he'd cracked the code on solving the homeless problem in San Francisco. From 2006 onward, it's been done. So mission accomplished to Gavin Newsom. I will go with someone who's actually declared that they're running, and from at least one, I'm sure, very scientific poll is polling in double digits. That's Robert Kennedy Jr. Ooh. He's the... I don't know how this became all about the Kennedys, but why not?
It happens.
I have been enjoying, maybe it's not the exact word, but noting with amusement an apparent block of online people who one might call libertarians for Nepo baby Chavista people who want to jail you because you don't believe in climate change.
Is that a hashtag?
I feel like we can do better.
I'm workshopping it here. No, people are, because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is against vaccines and against the kind of biomedical state, as he puts it, unironically, and he's also anti-war. A lot of people are very excited and saying that, that the establishment is scared of him because he speaks the truth and all this. Just want to point out a couple of interesting things about his past. He's an election denier, thinks that 2004 was stolen by Republicans. You know how people are freely using the word fascism to describe Trump and maybe Tucker Carlson and other people, and you might agree or might think that it's slightly hyperbolic. He was using that word in 2005 for George W. Bush, talking about the corporate Mussolini-like fascist takeover of the United States. Literally wrote a column with a headline, Jail Climate Deniers. That was his idea. that what we should do is that if there is any kind of corporate entity that receives money from people like, for instance, the Coke industries, who then go out and don't prefer his ideas about affecting climate change, that governments should have the power to dissolve them, give the death penalty to these corporations. And now the Cato Institute should die, American Enterprise Institute should die, Chevron, and a bunch of other people. So to watch libertarians get excited about Robert F. Kennedy is, I should have realized that was going to happen, but it's ridiculous. Okay, let's go to a quicker round, perhaps, of the more marginal candidates here. Suderman, the aforementioned Vivek Ramaswamy, and I'm sure I'm getting his name perfect.
You usually do.
Who the hell is he, and why is he running for president?
So he's a former biotech CEO who makes Ron DeSantis look like a draft dodger in the culture war. Like, the guy wrote a book titled Woke Inc., and if that's like, if you don't understand what his main thing is at running for president, it's, oh, the corporations, they're really woke. So like Ron DeSantis, there's a great Washington Post article about 6 months ago or something, a year ago. It was like, here are all the things that Ron DeSantis has called woke, and like some of them were like ice cream and squirrels or something like that. But like Ramaswamy is like, oh no, I'm gonna take it to the next level. But since we've already done the culture war shtick here, I want to actually go to his worst idea. He is probably the foremost proponent in the Republican political party apparatus of bombing Mexico? I'm not making this up. He's like, absolutely, we should do that. It's an option. We should put it on the table. We should label the cartels as terrorist organizations, and then we should send the military in. Like Trump, he sent some National Guards guys to live by the border for a few weeks, and that was really dumb. But Ramaswamy was like, wait, what if we did that even dumber? And that is the thing that he is pushing harder than anyone else, is bomb Mexico without, asking them permission. I guess you don't ask permission to bomb. It's a bad idea. He would be a bad president. On the other hand, he got rid of Don Lemon and Tucker Carlson in 1 week, and he's coming for Nick Gillespie next. So maybe I'm going to vote for him.
Bring it on.
I will be making an exception to my non-voting rule. Just this once.
As Andrew Sullivan says, no hope, or he used to say about Obama for some reason. Katherine, you're a lady. What about Marianne Williamson?
I sense a pattern.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the thing about her. She did real good traffic for us the last time around at Reason.com.
And let's be honest, there's some staffers.
We have
a
couple.
There's some crushes.
Not me, to be clear. Yeah. I'm loyal to Mitch, but there are some staffers who do like her. She did one time say about state violence, if your government does it, that doesn't make it less of a crime, which did endear her to me.
All right.
But also she's insane.
It's not very nice. Nick, I want you to tackle a marginalized candidate who has no hope of winning, named Mike Pence.
Yeah. Mike Pence is the pudding that Ron DeSantis had. Just a big blob of vanilla pudding. Not French vanilla, because that would be a little gay.
Unpaid.
So Pence actually, and I'll just very quickly say the one good thing about Pence, when he was a congressman from Indiana, he voted against the Medicare prescription drug program, and he is, to my understanding, the only candidate in either party who has actually said no, entitlement spending is a big, big problem, and we need to fix it. His ideas to fix it are too slow and too milquetoast, but he's got that going for him.
I will close the bidding here on someone who I think announced. I don't think that he even believes that he's running for president, but he's using it as a vehicle for fundraising, and it's someone who I like. And I'm guessing that the room doesn't like as much as I do. His name is John Bolton, and I say that I like him. Hold on, boo. It's not only mustache envy, although it is mustache envy, but I like him as someone to do television on. He used to come on our TV show, The Independent, and he will do any stupid thing on television that you want him. I encourage you Just we'll go for it. I encourage you to.
He's also really good with farm animals that way.
I don't know what that means.
I don't want to know what that means.
Do a YouTube search on John Bolton and National Hug Day. Just do it. It's true. He did this thing. He spun around a thing. He used to be the president of Red Eye, as he was called, and got to know him after a while, and find him incredibly pleasant. And he'd be such an awful president that it boggles the mind. He wants to be. He calls himself a hawkish libertarian. He actually does. Libertarian, meaning that he was for gay marriage back when Democrats were against it, and also he doesn't want to spend all the money, but he does want to bomb all the countries preemptively, every single one of them, and also do it in such a way that it's all unilateral. We have to, as America, enforce every non-proliferation treaty by bombing people with really heavy weaponry, is his idea. I don't think that it means his presidency at all seriously, but I think he's excellent on television. Okay,
New Zealand is very suspect and probably deserves it.
I mean, chemical weapons in Hobbiton, they're coming for you. Debbie, come on. Do you live there? No, you live here. Speaking of places where people choose to live, Nick and I have got some problems with Peter and Katherine, and we've been meaning to bring it up, and so we decided to do it now.
Kids, we need to talk.
Now, Nick and I both have lived in Washington, D.C. for work for a while, and we do things like, you leave because you come up with a good idea. Katherine and Peter live in Washington, D.C. by choice and with professed affections. As people who work for the flagship libertarian publication on the planet, there are those who would argue that there's something incompatible about that. But even aside from that, you like it, Katherine. Katherine, please defend your lifestyle choices of living in Washington, D.C.
Listen, not to be all like Rod Dreher about it, but I am from there. Like it's my home, and I think it's an objectively good city. I'm gonna stick up for it in the following ways. One, the default conversation in Washington, D.C., which comes in for much mockery, is what do you do, right? It's like, talk about your job. And that's better than everyone else's stupid default conversation, which is also bad. I don't want to talk about the weather. I don't want to talk about what route you took to drive here. I don't want to talk about which train is broken, although they're all broken in D.C., so it's quick. That conversation's quick. People in D.C. have interesting jobs, although no one makes anything real. In fact, the first time I came to New York as a teenager, I was driving up 95, coming on the New Jersey Turnpike, and I said to my dad, "Why did they put like these factories and stuff so close to the city? Like that they're so dirty. Like why would they?" Because I had lived my whole life in Washington, D.C., where we don't have factories and stuff. It's good to talk to people about the thing they care about, which is also the thing they do all day. And that's what we do in DC. And I also do like the free museums, although I say a little like libertarian penance every time I go in. I'm like, they're not really free. The museums are good there too. Thank you, the end.
Nick, why is Katherine not just wrong but immoral? And why is New York a superior place to live?
I mean, what I like about New York and why I've returned here after 30 years away is just because New York is simultaneously the most repressive place in the world. It's overregulated, overtaxed, overpoliced, over everything. But you really can just do whatever the fuck you want. So it's and this is a conundrum. Our friends in the Free State Project in New Hampshire, which I think is somewhere north of Canada, are constantly like, you're not a real libertarian if you live in New York. And I get that, but there's a lived freedom here, which I find really fascinating. And I love New York it is creative destruction. It's constantly remaking itself. I've told this story before. My father was born in Hell's Kitchen in 1923. One time we were going to go see, I was going to say we were going to see a ball game, but we were actually going to see the Mets in the mid-'70s. So In any case, it got
John
rained out.
Stearns' people too.
It got rained out, and he was like, well, do you want to see where I was born in Manhattan? And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And we walked over, and it's not only was the building gone, but the street was gone. And I have no idea what he was thinking, but I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. That like in your lifetime, like your entire birthplace is gone and something else is there. And that's what I love about New York. There's a lived freedom here.
Is that a can you erase your father? Just like from
obviously.
all lived.
And
Paging Dr. Freud for some analysis here.
I pushed him in front of a subway train and then panhandled on the way home.
Peter, when I lived in D.C. and worked in the office, there was a terrible burger joint across the street that we used to go to.
It wasn't my fault.
No, but what was your fault was, this is early in my tenure there, it was crowded, and there's TVs over there, but I didn't have my back to them, and people were really excited about stuff that was happening. I'm like, oh, okay, like who hit a home run, or who won the playoff game, and it was because John Sununu was on C-SPAN too.
Yes.
And I just like, okay, fuck this place. I have to go. You actually like that. I've heard you say that you like that aspect of Washington, D.C. How dare you, sir?
Yeah, so the best thing about Washington, D.C. is that when you go to the gym, almost everyone is watching C-SPAN.
Not the best thing.
And maybe like C-SPAN the Ocho, right? Like they're watching the staff meeting that is happening before the senator delivers the speech. It's awesome. No, and then this goes to what Katherine was saying, is like you go to a random house party and everybody there is a subject matter expert who is really interesting, who knows a bunch about a bunch of stuff. But the actual reason that I moved to Washington, D.C., the reason that I stay there, and the more earnest reason is that you can make a living as a writer. And that's kind of important if you want to be a writer. And then you can buy a house in a gentrifying neighborhood where you probably won't get shot, and you can walk to bars and spend the money that you make from writing on cocktails. And they're really good. And the thing about the DC cocktail scene is, and the DC bar scene is, you go to a bar in DC, and your bartender probably has a master's degree in poli-sci from Georgetown. And they'll catch you talking about what's on C-SPAN, and they'll be like, oh yeah, so I've got some insider knowledge, and I'll tell you what the deputy legislative assistant told me last night. And you'll be like, oh, tell me. And then make me another Manhattan, and it's fucking great, because everywhere, the professional class is just filled with like interesting, smart people who know stuff and who make you great drinks.
It's worth pointing out that in D.C., you order a Manhattan. I haven't heard anybody in Manhattan say, give me the foggy bottom. You know?
I tried to figure out for the longest time like what was off about DC. I lived there for 4 years and liked parts of it. I like the free museums and it's very nice to breathe the air because parks and there's no factories and such. But there's something off. Like what is it? And then finally it occurred to me that there isn't any advertising on the side of buildings. Very, very little. Like basically, billboards are banned. I'm from Southern California. The last thing in the world that is banned is the gaudy displays by the side of the road. That is everything. There's going to be people dressed up as human hot dogs doing backflips on the side of the road in Southern California with neon and like sombreros. It's great. It's how life should be, exuberant and silly and tacky. And in DC, it's beige. It is just beige. The people are beige. They get the pearls that all the ladies wear, they're beige. I've never seen so many beige uniforms
Katherine's
outside.
Hair is right here.
She's the libertarian exception. She's got the purple libertarian lady hair thing. Okay, I think that New York beats Washington in the end. We are going to pivot in our waning 12 minutes before the 7 o'clock aforementioned cutoff time here, and go to what we usually do at the end of the podcast. This is something, I think this was a suggestion from listeners, like, hey, what do you guys read? I'd like to hear more about it. And we started talking about it, and I thought no one would care or be interested, especially when Peter's like talking about Marvel and stuff. But people are interested in it, and so we thought we would do a little twist and talk about pieces of culture that we all enjoy, or like a whole lot, that have something to do with the city of New York, which after all throws off a little bit of culture. And note that there's 4 of us here. And so by the time we get around to number 3, which is probably going to be me, I'm predicting, that's when it would be a decent time to start lining up for those of you who have questions to ask us terse, to the point questions and not speeches. So that'll be time for that too. But let's start with a New York related or New York evoking in some way piece of culture that is meaningful to you, Katherine Mangu-Ward.
First of all, I want to say this is like some bullshit of stacking the deck on the DC versus New York debate.
Thank you.
That you're like, and now 4 people talk about why New York is great. But I am going to see your New York and raise you an Ayn Rand, Matt Welch. That's what I'm going to do. I think the best piece of media about New York is Atlas Shrugged. Wow. And y'all haters can suck it, because it's a beautiful, weird book about like the energy and beauty of a city. And Ayn Rand has this quote about New York that is actually really good, where she says, "I would give the greatest sunset in the world for one sight of New York's skyline." And then she says, "particularly when you can't see the details." And I think that's about right, actually. She goes on to do this great riff about, like, don't tell me about your, like, trip to see some kind of savage temple in the jungle. Like, that's not spiritual. New York is spiritual. And then she says, I feel that if a war came to threaten this, I would throw myself into space over the city and protect these buildings with my body. Oh. Which is like hardcore, girl. Like no chill, which I think we can agree Rand had no chill. But she's right about New York. And when I go into Grand Central Station, like, it's Taggart Terminal. It just is. I'm sorry. And the city is beautiful for the reasons that, like, Rand correctly identifies with beauty, which is its busyness, its industry, its creativity, and its opportunity for people to be great.
Please clap. Peter Suderman, which Marvel movie do you...
So actually the best Marvel movie was set in DC, but we're not going to talk about that. So everyone here, I assume, has heard of the Manhattan cocktail. Possibly you have also heard of the Brooklyn cocktail, which is quite similar to the Manhattan, but just a little bit different. So instead of rye and sweet vermouth and bitters, it's rye and dry vermouth, and then maraschino liqueur, and a French bitter liqueur that you can't really get in the United States right now called Amar Picon. Okay, right, so that's the Brooklyn. And then there's this whole family of this extended family of Manhattan riffs named after every neighborhood in New York. So there's the Little Italy, and there's the Red Hook. There's all of these different cocktails that have sort of iterated out of the Manhattan, many of which were created in the aughts at the dawn of the cocktail renaissance. And I want to tell you about my favorite one. It is the Bushwick. And the Bushwick is named after a great neighborhood, but it's also just a Brooklyn, or at least what we thought was a Brooklyn, except instead of dry vermouth, it uses sweet vermouth. And it's really delicious, and you can make it with ingredients you can get in the United States because, you know, even though you can't get Amar Picon here right now, you can get Bigley, China, and Myrrh, or you can get Amaro Chiaro. These are actual words, I promise you.
They're not.
These are things people put in drinks. But the point is, it's the same drink as the Brooklyn, except with sweet vermouth instead of dry. But here's the funny thing. about all of this, because this is in some ways, if you look at these drinks, they are a story of iteration and invention and how technologies evolve by taking like a standard format that people like and then just tweaking it just a little bit and giving it a name that references the previous thing and sort of understanding some history, right? Like innovation isn't like, wow, I just had a brand new idea that nobody ever had before. It's, wow, I really like the Manhattan and I want a drink that kind of tastes like it but isn't a Manhattan. So I made a Brooklyn. So I made a Bushwick. Except that the Bushwick, like I said, sweet vermouth instead of dry vermouth. And then one of the preeminent cocktail historians of our time, because we live in a world that is so economically developed that there are people whose whole job is cocktail historian, he went back and found the original recipe for the Brooklyn. And he discovered that the Brooklyn recipe that we'd been making for a decade was wrong because of a transcription error, probably because it was done while drinking, and that the original Brooklyn used sweet vermouth, not dry vermouth, which means that the Bushwick is just the Brooklyn as it was meant to be, which is probably true about the neighborhood as well. It's a delicious drink and a great story about discovery, invention, and iteration, and how progress is made also. Man, if you can get one from Phil Ward, who is still working at Long Island Bar in Brooklyn, it's just one of the best drinks to have been invented in the last 20 years.
And a solid bar.
He is absolutely always like this, in case anyone is wondering.
Normally in the podcast, I would go to Nick here, and I'm not, for a very important reason, which is that he wanted all of us to reveal on Slack before we talk what we're going to talk about, and then he threatened to like change his because we wouldn't reveal because he would reveal, and so I don't want any possibility. I
also am going to switch mine to sweet vermouth right now.
Yes.
I'm just telling you.
That's part of the discovery process as well. This would also be a decent time for anyone who's interested in asking us questions for the 15, 20 minutes after we're done to start lining up. I have long been fascinated by music that comes from the year 1989, the revolutionary year. It's very strange. Hip hop is starting to rise up, especially in New York City. It's the last of hair metal and grunge is starting to kick up. But then also a lot of the music that's being made is having direct impact or is being used by people who engage in all of the revolutions against communism in Eastern Europe and stuff. It's really fascinating. And one of the best and earliest of that whole series is Lou Reed's New York. Lou Reed in New York. So this is a return to form. There was this little reactionary moment by like 40-year-old rockers in 1989. Lou Reed, David Bowie with Tim Machine, and then Neil Young with whatever Keep on Rockin' in the Free World thing he did later on, where they all got back to guitars and like no more of that synthesizer stuff. Come on, man, we're keeping it real. So Lou Reed does that very straight setup, but then the lyrics are like reading a 700 like page version of the 1989 or 1988 Village Voice, which is to say it's awesome because the Village Voice back then just absolutely kicked. But it's all about New York and what a hell pit it is. I think he calls the Statue of Liberty the Statue of Bigotry like 3 different times. There's like human filth in the Nile and all around the East River. He's constantly criticizing Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani in the same song, I'm Sick of You, which is really fantastic. The best song on there is probably Good Evening, Mr. Waldheim, where he's just really, really pissed off at Jesse Jackson for his Hymietown remarks. It's great, and it's a little tender and sweet, too. And I just love the idea that this really kind of acerbic, not quite anti-American, but really critical of America thing is done by a guy who, you know, in November of that year, there's the Velvet Revolution that's named after his first band, the Velvet Underground, which is like the people are totally love Lou Reed for everything that he does and loves America for it, too. So Lou Reed's New York. Nick can't take it. Nick, take us home with what is your New York cultural recommendation?
Well, and thank you. I feel like it's not as good as what these guys came up with, but I want to ask you all to reread a book that you probably hated because it was shoved down your throat in high school or maybe even middle school, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Which, first off, it's got the great advantage of being very short, which is always the best thing about a novel, but It's set in early 20s New York, and it is, towards the end, the main character, the narrator, Nick Carraway, says, I realize now, after everybody's been shot and killed and run over and whatnot, this is really a story about the Middle West. And it's not. It's about New York. And in that book, if you read through it, what's happening is America is moving from becoming rural to urban. It's moving from being a WASP kind of unipolar, single ethnic power base to a multi-ethnic country. And it's happening in New York City, where blacks are moving up from the South, where Italians and Greeks and Jews are pouring into the city and making it their own. And Nick Carraway, if you look at almost every scene, around the edges, he is freaked out by all of this, and he ends up beating a hasty retreat. And I think this novel is ultimately about New York, to go back to that idea of it's a creative destruction. It's the site of creative destruction in America. Things are constantly changing. Things are kind of morphing. At one point, he meets the character Meyer Wolfsheim, who's a Jewish gambler who has fixed the World Series. It's based on a real character and whatnot. And he can't deal with the idea that in New York, anything can happen. And at one point, he talks about driving into the city, and he realizes he's driving with Gatsby, who just is too beautiful for this world. He can't hack it. Meyer Wolfsheim has created Gatsby, but he says, I realize as I enter the city, anything can happen here. And that is absolutely true. It's true of New York particularly. It's true of America. And if we get the tax rates right on marijuana, it'll be true of tonight. So it's a great actor for me.
Well done, Mr. Gillespie. We're going to go to audience questions in a half a second. I just want to put a button on saying thank you even before all of that for being a generous audience, for everything. And thank you particularly to all of you who subscribe, who donate, who sit on our board. Some of you are here. Makes it all possible. It's not many magazines in the world that are able to have almost half of its editorial or editor-in-chief history on stage together without actual violence and
not in a court of law.
Not in a court of law. So thank you all for that. Now, let's go to audience questions. You, sir, ma'am. Yes, sir. Nathan.
Sir, Nathan. Nice meeting you. I'm wondering whether there's any hope in your minds of the current court reining in the wildly expansive interpretation of the Commerce Clause, and if so, how do you imagine that going?
I mean, I imagine that a lot. Do I have hope for it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a Bud Gorsuch thing, right?
But Gorsuch, maybe he'll do it. No, I mean, I think that there is some understanding both on the court and also just in general in Washington, D.C., where I live, that maybe things have gotten a little out of hand, and that selling raw milk on a roadside stand to your next door neighbor is maybe not interstate commerce. But it's hard for me to see the road from here to there.
I think Obamacare showed both the hope and the limits of that. The 2012 decision did, in fact, say that the individual mandate was illegal was not constitutional under the Commerce Clause. And then they're like, but, it's legal another way, so we'll just allow it as a tax. That's fine. And that is the limitation, the type of limitation that we should expect to get going forward is, well, we're going to bound this so that authors of legislation going forward understand that maybe, hypothetically, theoretically, we might put some sort of limitation, but for the most part, we're just going to give you our blessing to do stuff that seems like stuff that you could do.
Thank you for that. Next cue, please.
That was good and short, by the way.
Appreciate that.
Loved that.
Well done.
Hi, my name's Cristobal. Going back to your conversation on marijuana and legalization in New York City, do you think that the misplaced anxiety that people are playing in legalized marijuana that's come recently in New York City, was that primarily because of the lockdowns, or is there some other cause that's happened in the past 3 years that people are misplacing their blame on marijuana?
I think that there's so many different factors that are going in. The lockdowns are obviously a huge part of it, but so the lockdowns really affect, for instance, schools. There are tens of thousands of kids missing from the school system in New York. Like literally no one knows where they are, which is kind of strange. And so where are they? If you are 15 and you're in my neighborhood, there's a decent chance that you're not in school and you're roaming around. And you know why those vape stores are so bright? Do you?
I know they have lights and all that, but
it's so that you can see it. They have because they're cash-based businesses. All these gray market businesses are just sitting around on cash, and this has been plaguing the marijuana business for a really long time too. And so they make them as bright as humanly possible, so that we can maybe get a read on the person who just robbed you. So that's just not good. And the 15-year-old's like, cool, okay, I can rob you, then maybe. And there's a friend of mine who's a cop. As pointed out, like if you want to stop crime in New York, granted he's a cop, so take for whatever. Yael, I'm not casting aspersions. In fact, he might even be here. But like if you want to put a crimp into crime in New York right now, go to a middle school at closing and hang out between there and the park, because they're going to be going to the vape store, which is a great market. And it's going to be so all these different things are going on at once, including a ratchet down, for the most part, pretty good, of punishing people in various places as well. But it's really hard to defactor it all. A lot of people suspect that cops are kind of sitting on their hands and saying, "Oh, it's Alvin Bragg's fault. I can't enforce the law as much as I want to. So why would I even bother?" It's really hard to untangle. But you see, I mean, to answer your question, I think the anxiety is that the place has gotten kind of noticeably worse, and so people want to do something about it.
I would just add one weird angle, which is that smell is intensely associated with memory and impression. And so when a newly disordered street, and I do agree with Matt that like the streets are somewhat more disordered now in New York and DC and San Francisco than they were pre-pandemic, a newly disordered street that also smells of weed, people are going to hook in onto the weed smell as like a thing that is like, oh, it's disordered because of the weed smell. No, the weed smell is just there, and also there is more disorder than there used to be. But like the fact that it is smell that people are focused on is like a real weird psychological tick that people have, where it's like, oh, you know what I remember about my grandma's house is the smell of Cinnabon. Well, it's all right, and that's why Cinnabon pumps that smell into your malls. It is because they want you to remember that, and the weed thing is an inverse Cinnabon effect.
Thank you so much.
Peter's grandmother was an air traffic controller. Actually, it's a little known fact.
Thank you.
I got a question about, I guess, like local governance. Like, why do you think that, say, like in France, they have unions everywhere, but they seem to build infrastructure, and why here they seem to be an impediment? Like, what's the difference beyond just corruption, or is there anything you can point to?
Well, wait, let me do it. Matt, you're from France.
Thank you. That's good. Appreciate that. So the French public sector is the most efficient public sector of any country in the world, and has been for a long time. It's a big paradox that economists try to figure out. Selectively, the French can tell their unions to get bent. In the same way that John F. Kennedy told unions to get bent in the 60s during the space race. It's like, okay, don't do any of this crap. We gotta beat Sputnik here. So, for instance, it was inconceivable in France for the unions to get in the way of whatever the government wanted to do to open schools. Whereas in America, because we have this sort of decentralized, dispersed system, and the unions have all this power, we had the most closed schools in the country, or in the world, basically, of the Western world. So that has something to do with it. Also, France uses more private sector infrastructure projects. They have like huge, gigantic, billion-dollar, like build the private highway things that the U.S. is only very slowly, thanks to the heroism of Robert Poole, has been laggingly getting into as well. So we tend to think that, France. Right. That's right. Never not clap for Bob Poole. We tend to think of Western Europe as being really sclerotic and not having any ideas about this kind of stuff, but they actually do infrastructure a lot better than the United States on some like basic organizational way.
I think there's also an overhang. New York, one of its real failings is an arrogance, not displayed by anybody on this platform. But particularly after the boom that started really in the 80s, but then continued uninterrupted for decades, we've gotten back to a place where the government doesn't feel a need to do anything. They're like, where are people going to live? Everybody wants to be in New York, and that, with a lot of special interest politics and environmental regulations and oversight and things like that, it really makes it hard to even pick up the trash, which is getting worse. And unfortunately, it's like the way that a recession squeezes inflation out of the economy. We might need something approaching the 1970s when New York lost 10% of its population to kind of get the city to be like, you know what, we got to actually start doing stuff again.
New York's arrogance, though, takes both forms. It both takes the form of like, yeah, we're going to give you nothing and you're still going to live here and you're going to like it. Yeah. And it takes the like Robert Moses form, and it's historical of like, yeah, we're just going to knock down an entire neighborhood, and what are you going to do? And I think that's like it's unfortunate for this lovely city.
It is.
Hi, I'd love to rewind to the presidential candidate conversation because you've all filled me with despair, and I agree that everyone sucks, but I would love to hear who you think sucks the least.
It's a trap. That's bait.
It's a trap.
Wait, now
I love someone that you can say something positive about from a libertarian perspective.
Let me say something positive about Ron DeSantis, and Suderman got him pretty good. Which is to say, on an issue that obviously I care about a little bit more than the average person, he's opened the schools. He ordered the schools open. He even kind of maybe used more force than I would feel totally comfortable with. But he was right about that. He was called Ron Death Santis. There was people like with the death person was like on beaches in Florida because people were on the beach. Remember? You remember? Yeah, like he's dressed up as Dr. Death or something. And there's the crazy lady Rebecca.
No, the actual guy from the Seventh Seal.
He was, and he was right about doing that, about reopening the economy and reopening schools in particular. And he did it in a way when people were unloading on him, where he was just like, "This is what we're going to do." I appreciate that the sort of why he fights element on the one time where maybe there's been a couple where he fights on something that I happen to agree with him on. Awesome, but like, why are you picking a fight with Disney? So like people who do competent things in government is so rare that I appreciate that he, in a time of trial and fire, did a competent and important thing that showed certainly blue states what they should have been doing and then did not do.
Yeah, there's a reason why people are moving to Florida, and it's not because he's banning books, but on a big picture, DeSantis, we have a guy at Reason who actually moved from California to Florida. Did a video about it. The cost of living there is cheaper. It's not DeSantis per se. I mean, there's going back 50 years, Florida has been a relatively low tax, low service, low regulation state, and that's drawn a lot of people. And that's really worth thinking about, particularly given the slate of people who we're going to have to choose from.
Since I went after DeSantis, I will just say that was the assignments. So that's what I did.
Just following orders.
I agree with Matt that, in fact, he was pretty good, not perfect, but pretty good when it came to COVID. And, in fact, he was a trendsetter and gave other governors permission and gave commentators, which was also important, gave people in the media permission to say, actually, we should do that rather than we should do what the Fauci-Cuomo California consensus on this sort of thing.
I definitely appreciate the vibes of the question, but I do also just want to go hard for none of the above. I really do think that is a viable position for us in this room to take. You cannot vote for any of these jerks. You cannot support any of these jerks. And you can still say, hey, I'm going to be involved in politics. I'm going to have some opinions about policy. I'm going to try and, influence the way that we live our lives under the law, and just be like, but all these guys, that's a no.
Thank you.
Hey guys, so you talked a lot about cities and places to live today. I was wondering, as a libertarian, where in Europe, let's say Western Europe, would you be comfortable living?
Albania. Great fishing, and they leave you alone.
That's a way of saying Nick goes to Europe about once every 50 years, I think, at this rate.
What's there? It took my relatives, my grandparents, on both sides of my family, literally thousands of years to leave Europe. Why would I move back there?
You know how there's that thing called that city people have called the walk score, where it's like they rank your neighborhood by like how walkable it is. I want the cold and cocktail score for like, and so wherever it's like cold and there are good cocktails, that's it. That's
London, baby.
Right. Yeah, so you're going to London? Yeah. It's probably good. I don't know. I guess I could go back to my ancestral homeland of Romania. I feel like a bunch of good libertarians have come out of there. But on the other hand, it seems maybe like it's terrible to live there. So there's that problem.
Yeah, they've come out of there?
Yeah, they came out of there. That's by design. Yeah, I mean, I think, so this is like all of us on this podcast here, we're from a pretty narrow band of lifestyle choice, fake conflict notwithstanding. But I would sooner by a lot move to like Jerry Tucci's Arizona stronghold, I think, than move to Europe. Like I think there's really, I think that there's something very American about libertarianism, and I like that, and I want to live in that place, and I would like an opportunity to shoot guns a little more often as well, and I don't think that's on offer in Europe.
I'd probably go with some post-commie place that I haven't lived in, so I don't know, Krakow or something. But then next to a beach, so maybe Albania really is the solution here.
Reason Roundtable visits Albania. Albania is
country on the ground.
They had bomb shelters there like every 3 feet during the Enver hoax. I think they've gotten rid of some of them or turned them into, I don't know,
cocktail bars.
Raccoon homes. The place that I live, Prague is a gorgeous, wonderful place, and have a lot of friends there. I could conceivably move back. It's terrific.
These questions are all so short.
Hi. All right,
he's not.
This one might be longer.
No, don't break the streak, my man.
This one's actually for Suderman, but feel free to weigh in. It's not about whether Thanos was the viable option for Ant-Man during the Infinity War, but over a number of podcasts, you've put forth your opinion that we shouldn't fuck with Russia because they had nuclear weapons, despite the fact that the Ukraine situation was happening. My question is, if you extrapolate that beyond Ukraine and Russia, and you think of other countries that may have nuclear weapons, let's say North Korea invading South Korea, would you have the same opinion that we shouldn't fuck with it because they have nuclear weapons?
So I don't think that I would characterize my opinion exactly that way, not because I object to the fucking with it phrasing, but shouldn't is a little bit strong. What my opinion is, when you are entering into what is effectively a proxy war with a heavily armed nuclear rival, you should be really, really, really extra, really even more than usual when you get into a war, which you should not really ever do. You should be extra, extra careful about that. Because a nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia, or between the United States and China, between any large nuclear power, is not like a, well, that went badly. That's like a, there's nothing left. That is potentially actually something close to the end of the human race. Probably it is not true that all people would die, but you're looking at deaths in the billions numbers there. And to risk that, even to take a very, 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 very small risk on that is, well, that's a big risk. And I get kind of anxious when those risks are taken by people like Joe Biden or Donald Trump or anyone who might be in the White House, because I don't trust those people to correctly calibrate and judge those risks. And so my point isn't that, oh, this will definitely go badly. My point isn't that the United States should absolutely never provide arms to an ally or engage in sanctions against, in economic sanctions against a country like Russia that is very clearly in the wrong and the aggressor. I want to be really clear here. There is no case for Russia's action. They are the bad guy, period. And yet, Just because something is bad in the world does not mean that the President of the United States should try to stop it.
Yeah.
Let's leave it there and actually keep having that conversation at the three sheets.
Because if I may, I just want to follow up. We also don't have military commitments to Ukraine. We did not have pre-existing. We didn't have treaties. We should be doing something to help them. But I'm on Peter's side here. We need to think that through more than clearly Joe Biden has.
This will be the end of our audience Q&A session. Thank you for all of it. I want to say before we part here and go there, special thanks to Hillary Hackerman, Jackie Pike, Jim Epstein, Hunt Beatty, and the Reason people who are here. Shout out to Jerry Ordstrom, chairman of our board. And thank you to all of you for coming out. Let's have a drink for crying out loud. And we're not being rude. We're just going to the next place soon. So thank you, everyone.
Happy Tuesday.
That's right. Happy Tuesday.